Hey everybody, welcome to the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have with us today the co-founders of the Seneca Project, Tara Setmayer and Michelle Kinney. We shall chat with them in just a second. But first, thank you for tuning in today. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please follow or subscribe and rate and review, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So here's a little feedback we got this week. This one comes to us from Judith Davidson, all the way in Portugal. Just wanted you to know how much I enjoy your straight talking podcast with intelligent, interesting guests. Thanks, Judith. Richard Coleza writes, the Ruth Ben-Ghiat explanations of the behaviors of the former guy are golden. The best analysis out there, probably the most accurate. Makes most other so-called pundits seem overwhelmed and confused. Have her back on soon. All right, let's get to our big things. Guys, we got an election in 11 days. Can you believe it?
No. No.
Scary.
It is so scary.
Very scary.
I can't believe it's only 11 days. It feels like
11
we've been
days.
talking about this for
I know.
a very long time now.
I was thinking the other day, I was like, oh my God, November is like 3-4 months. So like now it's 11 days. And we're going to blink and it'll be like, tomorrow's the election. Holy shit.
And then it'll be 4 weeks of knowing nothing.
Yeah. And then a few months after that, you guys will be visiting me in prison, maybe.
It's possible.
Possible. Hope, if I have to go, I hope I get to share a cell with Scaramucci.
Ooh, now that would be a
Would be fun.
podcast.
I think we could, right. We do a podcast.
Yes.
Mooch, if you're out there listening, if both of us end up getting locked up and sent to the same clink, let's do a podcast together. We gotta come up with a
Michael
name for
Cohen
that.
might join you too.
That would be amazing. That would be
The
so much fun.
trifecta.
We'd be like all the dudes in Goodfellas when they go to prison and they're like in a suite and they're cooking up spaghetti all the time.
I'll start working on the graphics for Prison Cast.
Big Paulie, little Paulie, young Paulie. So the polls, they're still even. I mean, if you look at the critical swing states, it's like toss up, toss up, toss up, toss up, toss up, toss up, toss up. But the thing that I really liked seeing this week is James Carville's op-ed in the New York Times, where he essentially guarantees that Kamala Harris is going to win. I think of all the people that have ever entered the game of politics, if there's ever one person you shouldn't go against, it's James Carville.
I certainly liked that opinion piece in the Times. I hope it's right.
I mean, think about it from this standpoint. This will be his legacy. If he goes out on a limb like he has, and she loses, that will forever be the thing that James Carville is remembered for, however unfairly or not.
Well, I think if polling was based on the predictors of the election, Harris is definitely going to win. I mean, we had Alan Lichtman on, who has a very good track record and is quite convinced she's going to win.
Yeah, well, I was talking to my son yesterday, and he was like, everybody's wrong eventually.
Yeah,
What if this is the year he's wrong? And it could be. But I think Lichtman looks at things differently than the way the rest of us do. He doesn't look at the polls. He doesn't look at fundraising. He doesn't look at noise. He doesn't look at rallies. He looks at the things that traditionally are what drives turnout and elects presidents. When Lichtman and Carville are both saying the same thing, optimistic Andy's in the room.
Woohoo!
He's back.
At least we can go to sleep at night until Election Day. A little bit.
I was up at 1:42.
I was up at 4.
And I slept like a baby. Straight through the night. Didn't have to get to pee or anything.
Wow.
Yeah. TMI maybe, but hey, to me it's a big thing.
Well, I mean, considering that we just celebrated your 65th birthday, I think that's huge.
Medicare, baby. Subway discounts. It's exciting times. Republicans, they have this pre-election swing state litigation strategy. I don't know if you've been following this for like Nevada, Michigan, North Carolina. They're trying to reduce the number of voters. The lawsuits claim that Democratic secretaries of state have not been complying with federal laws and that they're failing to take off ineligible voters. Registrations are too high based on the number of citizens that actually live there, blah, 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 blah. But they have, of course, zero evidence of any of this. So the courts keep throwing this shit out. There's no proof whatsoever. But here's the thing that's so unconscionable. The one thing they're really trying to do is to punish spouses and children of overseas military who have kids, for example, who were born overseas, but their parents' last state of residency is North Carolina. Well, under normal times, and for example, under North Carolina law, you'd be voting in North Carolina if you were that 18-year-old. You know, when you talk about which party respects the military, which candidate respects the military, look at what they're trying to do to the families of military members who are stationed overseas defending America and its democracy.
Unconscionable.
They don't care about anything. And if it came out that the military was suddenly more in favor of Harris, they would stop those ballots from being collected.
The whole military thing is unconscionable. I mean, we learned this week from Trump's former chief of staff, John Kelly, the things Trump said about Hitler. We also learned from this piece in the Atlantic about the U.S. Army soldier, Vanessa Guillen, who was murdered at a Army base in Texas. He had met with her family. He promised them financial aid for the funeral, whatever. And then afterwards, when he was presented with the bill by his aides, and it was like $60,000, he reneged and said it shouldn't be this expensive to bury, quote, a fucking Mexican. So this is how he treats soldiers, the military. We also saw him attack the shit out of Kelly and Mark Milley. I want to know, what kind of world do we live in where a 5-deferment, draft-dodging coward inflicted with bone spurs gets to call generals like Kelly and Mattis stupid people, not real generals, awful, blah, 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 low lifes. Fuck off, man. Like, how does anyone who's a veteran, how does anyone in the military actively, how is any family member of our military, how can they support this guy given his obvious disdain for the military?
You bring up excellent points, but he doesn't care about their service. He only cares about what people do to enrich themselves, or even better yet, him.
Service to him.
Right? So like it's really not that far of a leap in terms of his personality disorder.
It's consistent. I mean, we remember what he said about John McCain. It's always the same thing.
Oh, it's just unbelievable. So there was a CNN town hall with Kamala Harris.
Do you think Donald Trump is a fascist?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. And I also believe that the people who know him best on this subject should be trusted.
At that town hall, there was a woman who stood up and asked a question, and she introduced herself as a political science professor who's still undecided. How could you be?
Where is she a professor? That's what I want to know.
I want to know what school that's
and it's
from.
just
I didn't look that up.
If 11 days from the election, and you have seen everything from Trump, and you're still undecided, like, come on, seriously?
But then she'd be too in the weeds, and she'd be an elitist, and she'd be too wonky. There'd be something.
And it, also speaks to this double standard in the media. Media's basically like Arnold Palmer's dick, Hitler, enemies from within, shit vice president. That's just Trump being Trump. And also the media, yes, Kamala Harris laid out 5 points of her economic plan, but it really should have been 8. Like, we're dealing with a different set of rules here.
Also, his economic plan is to put a huge tax on everything people buy that comes from abroad, which is pretty much everything people buy. And they haven't really confronted him on the fact that a tariff is a national tax, because who the hell pays it but the consumer?
Yeah. Well, let's play this. This is what we learned from this audio portion of the recent New York Times interview with John Kelly.
And I think this issue of using the military to go after American citizens is one of those things I think is a very, very bad thing. Even to say it for political purposes to get elected, I think it's a very, very bad thing, let alone actually doing it. He's certainly the only president that has all but rejected what America is all about. And what makes America America in terms of our Constitution, in terms of our values, the way we look at everything, to include family and government. And he's certainly the only president that I know of that was certainly in my lifetime that was like that. He could be commented more than once that, that Hitler did some good things too. And of course, if you know history, again, I think he's lacking in that. But if you know what Hitler was all about, it'd be pretty hard to make an argument that she did anything good.
So he's referring to comments Trump had made to him that he wishes he had generals like Hitler. I mean, we lived in a world where if you went Hitler, you're done. You're done. Like my daughter Sophie, when she was like 12 years old, she said, if your brain ever hears you starting a sentence with the words, the good thing about Hitler is, like, just stop talking. Don't let those words out. Now we can have the nominee of one of our two political parties who obviously has a decades-long flirtation with Hitler, kept Mein Kampf on his bedside table, who has dined with at the White House Nazis like Nick Fuentes, who is scapegoating Jews, saying that they will be to blame if he loses, who said Nazis in Charlottesville were very fine people. Like, there are Jews in this country that have lost their minds and are supporting this guy because of Israel. I mean, I can't imagine that Jews, any Jew, could be like, don't worry about the Hitler stuff. It is mind-boggling that people are refusing to accept the words of these generals like John Kelly, who made the ultimate sacrifice, lost his own son in war. But somehow we shouldn't believe this man who himself enlisted, put on a uniform, protected and defended America and its democracy, and lost his son who did the same thing. We shouldn't believe him. We should believe Donald Trump. Here's a 4-star general telling you that this man is a fascist. Mark Milley, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, telling you Trump is fascist to his core. And people are brushing that off. Military people are brushing that off. I don't understand it.
I mean, Kelly being a Gold Star dad, and his other son is also in the Army. It's unfathomable. Not to mention, Trump's such a fucking moron about history. He wants Hitler's generals, the ones that tried to assassinate Hitler 5 times. And I mean, when he was confronted by this, by Kelly,
he said no.
No, they didn't.
Yes, they did.
History doesn't matter to him.
All right, let's get to our winners and losers.
My winner, election integrity. Courts continue to reject cases in Michigan, North Carolina, Georgia, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Arizona that would make significant changes too close to the election or that run afoul of long-established principles. My loser, Tucker Carlson, for verbalizing the smug misogyny of Republican men and their view of how women should be treated in the United States.
There has to be a point at which Dad comes home. Dad comes home. And he's pissed. When Dad gets home, you know what he says? You've been a bad girl. You've been a bad little girl, and you're getting a vigorous spanking right now.
He was referring to Donald Trump, and then the crowd started chanting, Daddy's home, Daddy's home, Daddy's home. This is where the Republican Party is today. They grab pussies, they spank girls' asses, and they've climbed up your uteruses to control your bodies. That's your great protector of women, Donald Trump. Anyway, go ahead, Manny.
My winner are the 2 Georgia election workers, Ruby Freeman and her daughter, who were awarded Rudy's penthouse apartment on Madison Avenue, and a bunch of other goodies like a 1980s Mercedes that was owned by Lauren Bacall. And my loser is Jeff Bezos, because the Washington Post has just announced that they will not endorse a presidential candidate for the first time since the 1980s.
My winner, to echo Jen, the Georgia Supreme Court, which upheld a lower court's block on Trump and Republicans' controversial new election laws. My loser, also Rudy Giuliani, who's been ordered to fork over his swanky New York City apartment and other valuables to Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, the 2 black Georgia election workers he defamed and who were awarded $150 million in damages. All right, it's time for the weekly rant. So in the last 48 hours, some Democrats have been getting excited about a supposed video that exists and is about to be released that would show Donald Trump allegedly groping a minor at a donor dinner. And the belief is that this could be a campaign killer. Seriously? Really? Even after 9 years of seeing and hearing and watching Trump do and say the most outlandish, vile, disgusting, offensive, sexist, racist, criminal things? Even after the Access Hollywood pussy-grabbing video, which was supposed to be a campaign killer, yet launched a still ongoing political career despite him being a twice impeached, 4-time indicted, adjudicated rapist and fraud convicted felon? Let me be straight with you. You're fucking delusional. If after 9 years you still think there's anything that's going to bring Trump down, you really do suffer from some strain of Trump derangement syndrome. Here's the sad, unfortunate, dangerous truth. Even if that video does exist, and he was caught red-handed groping an underage girl, and even if in that video he's in blackface with a Hitler mustache and wearing a Nazi Gestapo uniform with an I love rape button on the front and an Arnold Palmer dick pic on the back, it still wouldn't matter. The MAGA cult members love Trump because he legitimizes their worst behavior, their anger, their racism, and their fear. Say what you want about Trump, but he knew his audience when he said 9 years ago that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose support. Let's be clear. He could actually shoot a baby tomorrow, and Trumpers would claim the baby deserved it because it was part of the deep state. Democrats need to stop worrying about seducing so-called undecideds, who, by the way, I'm convinced don't exist. Instead, they should focus on turnout, because this election will be all about turnout. We can't change their minds with truth and facts and reality, but we can win elections with votes. All right, don't forget, stick around later for another exciting episode of Just Jeff. Now let's bring out Tara Setmayer and Michelle Kinney. They are co-founders of the bipartisan superPAC, the Seneca Project, which they launched earlier this year. Tara, Michelle, welcome back into the back room.
Hello, Andy. Thank you so much for having us.
It's great to be back.
So I want to start off with what I think is the obvious question. How are you feeling about the campaign right now? But here's the obvious part. It feels like the euphoria and the joy has morphed into panic. Am I wrong?
You are not wrong.
Yeah.
Tara, I'll let you go first.
What happened to the joy? Where did the joy go?
You know, I think the joy is still there, but the reality of the race tightening, which we all knew would happen, whether we liked it or not, I think we were all hoping it wouldn't happen, that the momentum would just continue to propel Kamala even further away from Trump, and that the vibe would ultimately carry her to victory. But those of us who've been in politics for a long time know that the summer is a very different dynamic than the fall, when more people are paying attention, when the hundreds of millions of dollars worth of attack ads are now flooding the airwaves, and people are just paying more attention to things. And so I mean, I have agita over the fact that it is as close as it is, but maybe it's not. I don't know. The polling has been so crazy and so off over the last 8 years. It's really tough to gauge where we are. We just know that it's close, and it's too close for comfort. And the Kamala Harris campaign has to continue to run as if they're losing, whether they are or they're not. They have to. It is pedal to the metal, no holds barred. This is not a time to be polite. This is not a time to be focus grouping to death. This is the time to go for it. It's leave everything on the field, because literally what could happen if Donald Trump wins again is unimaginable and unrecoverable, in my opinion, for our democracy.
So you're right. The fall is different than the summer, and we've seen a shift recently with Harris. She's going really full bore on the whole save democracy, he's a fascist thing. You think that's a smart tactic at this point?
I do. I absolutely do. I think that every issue that we care about, that's imperative to us being free in this country, I think all comes back to democracy. Because if that falls, nothing else will be able to happen for us. I mean, we're not going to be able to restore Roe. We're not going to be able to, strengthen our gun laws or do anything about climate change or the economy. I mean, we've seen what Trump's economic plan is going to look like. I mean, our economy, the bottom will fall out of it. We'll go into recession. I mean, all the writing is on the wall. And that's the thing that I think that frustrates me the most and scares me the most, is just this and I say this all the time, is a lack of imagination. People are not imagining how bad it can get. And I don't know if that's a survival instinct setting in or what it is, but even just this morning, right? This morning, the Washington Post made the announcement that they're not going to endorse. This is after the LA Times said, we're not going to endorse, after the editorial boards said they would. I think there's fear in the air. People don't want to piss Trump off, which I think speaks volumes to the health of our democracy right now. And I think therein lies the heart of why that messaging and that, final stretch rallying cry is so, so, so important.
I mean, that's like editorial malpractice.
Yes,
I can't imagine
1,000%.
under what scenario the putting aside the LA Times, but the Washington Post, are they that concerned about Kamala Harris that they can't endorse her?
Andy, I tweeted this morning, in 2017, when I threw myself into this fight 24/7, the first subscription that I bought was to the Washington Post, because I thought to myself, this is the paper of Watergate, the Pentagon Papers. They are a trusted voice in this country, in our democracy, for standing for truth and honesty and holding people accountable. And the fact that we are looking down the barrel, really, of what could possibly happen in the next 3 months, and a paper with that kind of legacy that has held the most powerful people in this country accountable in the last couple of generations to be making decisions out of fear and greed, quite frankly, is not just disappointing, it is chilling.
I mean, it's been years since Bezos took over the paper, but are we finally seeing the consequence of the lack of someone like Katharine Graham and the Ben Bradley mentality, and instead be taken over by this crazy billionaire bullshit?
I think what we're seeing is what happens, though, when the for-profit model gets in the way of good journalism. There has to be a balance here. That the whole tech bro, billionaire kind of kleptocracy, plutocracy of it all is an undercurrent here that I think is very underreported because of the influence. You look at Peter Thiel and his influence with whether it's buying off J.D. Vance and, propping up his career, or meddling in other areas, and the Leonard Leos, on the right-wing side of these billionaires that have been infusing all of this money and influencing like the Supreme Court justice nominations and all of those things. And now we're looking at, with Elon Musk, the news of him having conversations with Putin, and Putin asking him not to activate Starlink in Taiwan, and what happened in Ukraine, and Elon Musk paying people off $1 million in a quote lottery to get them to register to vote. Like, there's something very untoward about all of this. And the fact that you have Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, two of the richest men in the world, controlling some of the largest platforms that distribute information that people are looking to be informed. I mean, Twitter is a sewer, but it has huge reach. And the Washington Post, to Michelle's point, was a respectable paper. I mean, their masthead says democracy dies in darkness. This was Woodward and Bernstein. What is going on? And it's clearly a directive from on high, because they are afraid of the blowback. This is not a time for people to be scared of the blowback. Jeff Bezos, he'll be just fine if Donald Trump wins the presidency. He can go and live wherever he wants in a non-extradition country just fine. But the democracy will not be just fine. And he's in a position where he's putting a thumb on the scale to somehow create some false equivalency between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris because he's scared. Talk about privilege. How dare you? You are in a position to actually tell Donald Trump, and too bad. This is the fact. These are the facts, and the American people deserve to know. And we are going to take a position. Not taking a position in a time like this is just as bad as choosing the wrong side.
Yeah, it's unconscionable. And so, do you think there's also an issue where just the man on the street, the woman on the street, just doesn't understand what fascism even is? And to your point, Michelle, it's like, how could they understand what it will be like if they don't understand what it is?
Yeah.
How do you change that?
You know,
how do you educate people at 11 days out?
I mean, 11 days out, I don't know. I don't know at this point. I mean, the work kind of had to have already been done. And right now it's kind of get out the vote in this moment. We just have to make sure that the right people are showing up to vote. And we're seeing that Republicans are crossing over and pledging to vote for Kamala Harris in numbers that I don't think I've ever seen in my lifetime. I can't even remember reading about something like that, which is encouraging, you know. And it's funny that the Republicans in this country who want to do the right thing have more courage than the media outlets, you know, like the Washington Post and the LA Times. You know, they're willing to sacrifice their careers, their reputations, their financial security, all of those things. I mean, even just Tara, right? I mean, Tara crossed over how many years ago when Trump came out the gate and said, oh, hell no, I'm not doing this. And she left the party after 2020. And so, you know, I have to believe that there are enough people who want to do the right thing and can see the difference. And maybe if they don't know what fascism is, they can look at their television sets and see that there's a woman who cares and is compassionate and can talk about grief and love and her mother and you know what it's been like to be a leader and to be a woman of color leading this country. And then see the other guy who is making jokes about Arnold Palmer's genitalia, who has repeated stories of sexual assault, who brags about ending our rights to our own bodies, and who's just vulgar and disgusting and always has been. So
I convicted felon. What happens to that?
Right.
Jesus. God. I mean, right? You lose count. And so I always say I will never understand why the thing that didn't end him was the Access Hollywood tape or making fun of a reporter with disabilities. I mean, it was just it's just one thing after another, and he floods the zone with vulgarity. And I think that again, like I just have to believe that there's enough people who can just look at all of this and say, I know the difference between right and wrong, and I can see the difference between right and wrong. And I'm going to choose the right side.
How much do you blame the media? Because because to me, like the Washington Post non-endorsement is just like the icing on the cake, the final last straw. But I've been watching the media for years normalize Trump, the false equivalencies, Tara, that you talk about. You know, Donald Trump could talk about Hitler. He could talk about Arnold Palmer's dick. He could talk about Kamala's a shit vice president. But from Harris, they'll say things like, yeah, she gave 5 points of her economic plan, but it should have been 8. Like, I mean, we don't know enough about her fracking. Like
moving,
why
moving the goalposts?
Yes, so the bar is so much different for the two of them, and you'll see a panel on the news programs and be like, Donald Trump did this horrible thing. Why would he do that? And I'm screaming at my television because he's a fucking sociopath. That's why he's doing it, because he's a liar.
They try to deny that he did it, right? Yeah. They try to gaslight and deny that he actually did or said X, Y, and Z when we all saw it with our own eyes and
so how many
ears,
how many people at home
for years.
How many people at home after all these years are like, yeah, they're kind of the same?
A lot. I listen, I have been screaming about this since 2016. 2015, I thought that there was still an opportunity for people to push back on Trump in a way that didn't normalize him. But as 2016 came around and the way they were covering him versus the way they were covering Hillary, the whole butthurt emails, this is like a redux of that, where they're trying to somehow treat them both as though they're normal political candidates in a normal political cycle. There is nothing normal about Donald Trump and MAGA. Nothing. This is incredibly illiberal. It's incredibly threatening to our way of life. It is antithetical to what actual Republican orthodoxy used to be. There's nothing normal about this. But the media made a decision to cover Donald Trump with a shrug. When he does these things, they shrug it off and they put it in the box of, well, that's just Trump being Trump. But let's talk about Kamala and her, she only talked about 5 points instead of 8 points of her economic plan. Or she didn't really fully explain how she'd be different than Joe Biden. I'm sorry. Are we serious? You guys are actually having a conversation about she didn't answer that enough and seal the deal, when the same week that Donald Trump's chief of staff, a 4-star general and gold star father in John Kelly and former DHS secretary, basically his entire Joint Chiefs, the former defense secretary, have all come out and confirmed that they are scared to death of Donald Trump returning to power because he's in fact a fascist.
Right. Who admires Hitler?
Things.
Who admires
and
Hitler?
Admires Hitler's generals.
Yes, wants those generals.
Right. Like, how are we still talking about Kamala didn't answer the Joe Biden question enough when this is what we're facing? That how are these two things equivalent? And the fact that they are talking about it that way normalizes it to the average person who may not understand why they should be scared as hell and outraged that Donald Trump wants Hitler's generals and admires dictators. They may not get it because most people, they don't pay attention the way we do. Average, regular Americans are just trying to live, trying to provide for their families, go to college, work their jobs, and put food on the table. They're not studying the horrors of fascism anymore because that was something that was, that was 20th century. That's so 20th century. No, actually, it's not. It is facing us right now, but they don't appreciate what democracy means either. And you don't know what it's like until you lose it and you don't get it back. And that's something that I don't think that has been prosecuted. That case has been prosecuted enough to explain to the American people why so many of us are sounding the alarm and why it matters to them. And a lot of that has to do with we don't have civics anymore in school. We don't focus on these things. You can't expect people to appreciate something they don't know what it is in the first place. You're telling them, oh, we're going to lose this. We're going to lose this. They're like, we don't know what is this? What do you mean? It's like explaining. I use the example of oxygen or gravity. People understand that you cannot live without oxygen or gravity. And what happens when you don't have oxygen or gravity? You can't survive. So people can understand that. They take it for granted, though. We walk around every day. We breathe air. Well, what happens when you can't breathe? Then all of a sudden you go, oh, that's like what it is for our democracy. It's like cutting off our oxygen. It will suffocate us to death. But you have to explain that to people and make it real for them. And I think that that's what Biden was trying to do. Kamala Harris is trying to do that now. And the fact that she's brought so many Republicans along with her, that we've never seen that happen before either. When's the last time we saw this many Republican officials from the previous administration saying this person is unfit, there's no way in the world we could vote for him again, it's a danger to our democracy, we don't care about the policy differences, that doesn't matter, that is secondary. We are warning you, we worked with him, we saw who he is. He's not what you think he is. He's a danger and doesn't care about you and will destroy us. But it's a shrug. Well, Washington Post, we're not going to take a position. What?
And that's the thing too, Tara, that I there's a lack of not only just self-awareness on their part, but the amount of danger that they are not taking seriously either. I mean, you talk about and you look at countries around the world and throughout history whose democracies have fallen. The free press is a thing of the past. And I think Kamala Harris alluded to this, I think, a little bit in that town hall the other night with Anderson Cooper. And I'm paraphrasing, but I think he asked something like, who the enemy within, like, who's he talking about? And she kind of was like, you, all of us, all of us. And that's the lack of imagination. They all think they're going to be okay. And I'm like, he's already talking about taking the licenses away from major news outlets, including CBS, including MSNBC. Anyone that disagrees with him or gives him negative publicity, anything like that. And again, Donald Trump isn't a joker. He's not somebody who's like, oh, he means what he says. He's not that imaginative. He really isn't.
Mary Trump has said that too. Like, Mary Trump has reiterated that. Like, I know my uncle. Yeah. He's not joking. Yes, he does this entertainment thing where, he's like on stage when he does these rallies, but he's also not joking because he's not capable of that because he's a malignant narcissist. So a lot of people are rationalizing it, saying, oh, he's not really going to do that.
Well, look, he's banned Muslims. He's put kids in cages. He's had Nazis to the White House for dinner. He's tried to overturn an election and overthrow the government. Where is the mystery?
How much more do you need?
Yeah,
And there were people there to stop him, and those people aren't there
well, that's
anymore.
the key now, is that the infrastructure, the Trump ecosystem is so different that there are no guardrails. He will be a dictator. But you mentioned the town hall the other night. She was asked if he's a fascist, and she said yes. So she's starting to put that out there. Today she's got a big rally in Houston with Beyonce, which is kind of more fluff, I think, than anything else. But Tuesday...
Yeah, that's a get out the vote thing.
Yeah, Tuesday she has the closing argument, okay? Given what we're talking about, how do you think she should try to convince voters that day of what fascism would look like to them in their lives?
Graphic examples. She has to give relatable, graphic examples of what that means. Acknowledge that maybe people don't realize, like, this is a term that we haven't really used in the American lexicon in modern days. We haven't had to. It didn't apply. But this is why it applies now. And this is why you should pay attention and give the examples. She can use the examples in everyday life right now, what this would mean under authoritarian rule, what you would lose as an American. Talk to Trump, use Trump supporters as an example of these are the things that you guys like. Well, guess what? This is what it would mean for you too. This is what it would mean for women. This is what it would mean for union workers. You guys love your union jobs out there in the factories. By the way, we brought back, 600,000 manufacturing jobs. And we understand that you don't feel it. But you know what you will feel? You'll feel when Donald Trump, when your hardworking union husbands and wives are losing your benefits, and Donald Trump comes in and says, "Screw you" to the unions. It wasn't Donald Trump. It wasn't Donald Trump who was standing side by side with union workers. It was Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. Right? Literally on the picket line supporting workers. She has to use examples in all the areas where where people think Donald Trump is stronger than her, that, the economy and all of these things. Immigration's a little tougher because there is definitely a ugly underbelly of xenophobia and racism and bigotry that a lot of these people are okay with. That's a different discussion about why, but it's true because a lot of these people who, after the way Donald Trump has run this election and what he's chosen to focus on, which we've seen it's all racial politics and identity politics, everything that Republicans used to scream about for Democrats, which is, once again, the hypocrisy of it all, becoming what they claim to despise. But there's a reason they've done that, because they know that this gins up very strong feelings that are problematic, because they don't like the way the country is going demographically, and otherizing people and dehumanizing them creates a whole different us versus them that we're going to have to deal with. That's a bigger problem. But the people who are kind of casually looking at all of this, I think her doing this, the symbolism of her doing this from the ellipse, the same location that Donald Trump on January 6th gave his "Go Fight Like Hell" speech, and the contrast is a very powerful one, as long as she can prosecute the case in terms that the American people understand the true stakes and make it relatable to their everyday lives. It can't be too lofty. It can't. Because I think lofty, then it becomes esoteric. It's got to be tangible. And I think that she can pull that off. I do. But again, depends on how the media presents it. I mean, Donald Trump, the Hitler story, didn't make the front pages of the major newspapers. It didn't even lead the newscast.
Not a single one.
And it should have. You may not know what fascism is, but you damn sure know about Hitler.
Yeah.
So,
he did do some good stuff too.
Oh my God.
How did that not kill a campaign? It's just crazy.
Right.
It's crazy.
Right.
Crazy. Do you think there are truly undecideds left? Or is this election really about getting out your own base? Total turnout. Stop this nonsense of 55, 60% turnout and get 65, 70. If we just voted, we'd have everything we want. There'd be no Trump. Why don't people vote? And are they going to vote this time in numbers that are different than what we've seen historically? Because that's the answer right there. turnout.
Well, I think women are definitely voting at historic levels. That's for sure. I mean, we always vote at a higher propensity than others, but what we're seeing in the early vote right now in Georgia, 55% women, in Michigan. 53% women. Obviously, for us, the stakes are life or death, and we've never been faced with an election after we've lost a right. It's never happened in American history, and it's happening now. A presidential election, the midterms were indicative of the initial response to the Dobbs decision and overturning of Roe, but now we've seen the fallout from it, and we've seen how it applies across the country and what it means to send it back to the states. And women are going, okay, no, we're not doing this, because they're coming for more than that. They're coming for birth control, IVF, no-fault divorce,
all of
it. Right, voting rights. These Christian nationalists, they want women subjugated back to Puritan times.
You want to talk about something again that they're telling us, and to use your imagination, they're saying over and over and over again. Peter Thiel, who's like the leader of the broligarchy of tech world, says openly that he doesn't think women should be voting, and that we should all just be sitting at home having more children.
Yeah, well, this is an interesting
this is what
subject,
they think.
Because the work you do at Seneca Project is largely based on firing up women in particular, about reproductive rights and the loss of them. When I put my optimistic Andy hat on, I say to myself, since 2022, Democrats have won virtually everything. Everything. Special elections, abortion referendums in the reddest of states, and
Governor's races like Kentucky.
Yes. And women have done that.
It's crazy.
And they're going to do it again.
I hope so.
Well, that's our motto. Yeah. Galvanize women, save democracy. Because for us at Seneca, as a bipartisan women-led organization, we wanted people to understand, particularly women and the right of center women, that this is bigger than just abortion. Reproductive rights is where it started, that the loss of those decisions, but it's expanded to the loss of freedom. This is really a freedom issue, not just about abortion. It's about the freedoms that we enjoyed as women, that we do not have the same freedom we had that our grandmothers had at this point right now, which is insane to think about. And so if you either trust women or you don't, and you either trust us to make our own decisions in our lives, whether it's about our healthcare or anything else, or you don't. And the right of center women needed to understand that too. It's okay. You don't have to tell your husbands what you're doing. It's your ballot, your choice. But, Republican women need reproductive care too. And also we talked to the girl dads as well. We put out an ad called Hope about IVF because we saw that was under attack. But we did it very uniquely because no other organization, we may be a women's organization, but we appreciate our male allies too. And we're talking to the dads and the husbands who love their wives and their kids and their daughters. And we're saying,
we need them too. We need them.
It's a coalition effort. And our IVF ad was from the perspective of the dad talking about this, what it means to him. Nobody else has done that, frankly. And we're really proud of that. And it's having an impact, because if you look at some of these studies that came out, it shows what we already knew because we studied it too, but people are talking about it, that the most persuadable relationship is between a dad and a daughter. It's a very powerful relationship, stronger than husband and wife, than siblings, than family. It's daddy-daughter. Yeah. So daughters talking to their dads and getting that, that can change people's behavior, which is what we needed in this election. Go ahead, Michelle, sorry.
No, they say that for a lot of men and fathers, it's just, human nature. They see their wives as a reflection of them, and they see their daughters as an extension of themselves. And I think that, that really, it's so visceral. It's so visceral in a different way for them. And I know even just the way that my dad is protective of me, talking about these things and the things that he's had to learn and come around to just in the last, couple of election cycles. He talks about these things differently now because he sees how they affect me or would affect me if I was in those situations. And, I was just beyond just the reproductive rights stuff. I feel like I'm always learning something about the women in my family who came before me. My great-grandmother was a suffragist. She lived in upstate New York. She voted for the first time in 1920. She drove her own car. She drove women to the polls in her own car in November of 1920. But my grandmother my mom's mom. My mom told me the other day that, my grandfather didn't want her to drive, didn't think it was necessary, didn't think women really had a place other than just to make him dinner. And that she had to sneak out to get her driver's license. And you want to talk about, women needing permission and things. Like, she just did it and she didn't tell him, and she had it. And I think, as horrible as that is, and, women at that time couldn't even have bank accounts. That's another thing here. It's like the freedom of being able to control your own finances. There's so much here about freedom and choice and being able to make choices for ourselves from every aspect of our lives. I think we have to constantly be reminding ourselves and others, but it's also the reason why they're so scared of us.
Well, I think
because if we're free,
right. Well, when you think about it logically, it's like with how concerned and angry and fearful women are, and the men in their lives who want to protect them and preserve their rights, and then you couple that with the fact that Trump is completely unhinged. A convicted felon, all the things he's now that he wasn't 4 years ago. And with the way the elections have been going, it's hard to fathom that suddenly there's going to be a different outcome in this election.
I have to believe.
But the only thing I think of when I think of like, why would this election be different? It's because there's a black woman at the top of the ticket.
Well, what would ever make you think that, Andy, that there's a different standard for the black woman that's running? I mean, listen, I think that the last few years have really been eye-opening for a lot of us. And I know for me, I really was more hopeful before Donald Trump that the country was not as misogynist and racist as the Trump years have now uncovered. And the fact that we saw the double standard with Hillary, but with Kamala, it's so much worse. And just by what we were talking about before, by nature of how they cover Trump's foibles and how they cover Kamala's. Van Jones said on CNN the other night, and I have my quibbles with Van sometimes and things that he says, but he did say something that was on point, and I agree with him 100%. Trump gets to be lawless, Kamala has to be flawless. And if that isn't the line of the election, I don't know what is, because that's an exact microcosm of what we're facing here. And that standard for me as a woman of color,
I was going to say,
I was like, that hit me because I've realized that where I've been judged unfairly sometimes in those areas as well, how we're so, as women of color, we're just not valued the same.
Ain't that the way?
Yeah. Well, James Carville this week penned an op-ed in the New York Times where he says he's certain Kamala Harris is going to win. How do you feel about that?
Well, I'm not a pollster. I don't know these, I'm not a political scientist, but, I do know what it felt like at 9:15 in 2016 on election night. And I think we all have a bit of PTSD from that. So we're always a little bit cautiously optimistic to maybe agita, anxiety, panic stricken on any given hour between in the last couple of weeks. But that being said, I think a lot of pollsters, and they've talked about this, that they undercounted the Trump vote. And so they had to readjust how they, calculate this data and give this information to us. Are they undercounting the women vote this time? We don't know. And we won't know until after the election. And I think that bit of uncertainty is rattling given the stakes of how this could go for us. But I have to believe that there are enough good people. There are enough people who know the difference, who can come out and make the right choice.
I mean, Carville's not one to pull punches, and there are a few gurus in the world. He's considered one, and I think this is going to be his legacy. I mean, if she loses, that's how, forget Clinton, forget all the economy stupid. It's going to be Carville at the senior moment in his life, went out on a limb, and man, was he wrong. Like, he's going to be Bill Buckner, to use a baseball analogy. Like, so I kind of feel like, all right, that makes me feel good in a sense. Like, why would he do that?
Yeah.
Unless he's really certain.
Look, I think that, if you remember the movie Crimson Tide, which is one of my favorite movies ever, there's a scene where Gene Hackman and Denzel Washington are talking, and they're talking about the war historian von Clausewitz, and they're saying the only certainty about war is uncertainty.
Right.
And we are in a political war.
Mm-hmm.
So the only thing I'm certain of is the uncertainty of what this result's going to be. And I appreciate James Carville, and I appreciate his confidence here. But and I hope he's correct. I really do. I hope for so many reasons. I hope he's right. Alan Lichtman, who is the professor that does the 13 keys, then he hasn't been wrong. He was only off by one, and that was the Bush v. Gore, which I mean, there's no way, that situation was just crazy and always. But so he is pretty confident also based on the 13 keys, which has been correct in the last 9 elections. And I also look at the ground game, and I see the investments that the Democrats have made in the ground game.
That's real.
To answer your question before about, is it a turnout election at this point now? Are there any undecideds? I think the only undecideds are whether they vote or not.
Right.
And not who they vote for. It's whether they actually vote. So it is a ground game turnout operation from this point forward. I don't think you're necessarily changing any minds.
Yeah.
It's who gets the butts to the polls. And so Republicans are relying on outside super PACs and Elon Musk and all kinds of other things. They don't have the same infrastructure that they used to have because they dismantled the RNC, and that's what the RNC was really good at. Instead, they're putting money in trying to sow chaos in the election under the guise of election integrity. I'm very concerned about what that looks like after, no matter what happens on election night.
Yeah.
But Democrats have been very disciplined and focused, and they know how to get the vote out. And places like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, these union states that have organizing apparatuses on the ground, like
souls to the polls,
to the polls in the South and the southern states, like that's where I think you're going to see the difference here. And that'll push her over the edge, on top of course, women saying, hell no, we won't go back.
Well, we're going to find out in 11 days. Tara, Michelle,
Great.
Thanks for coming on. Hope
Thank
to have
you,
you back
Andy.
again soon and do a little post-mortem.
Yes.
Take care.
God willing.
Thank you.
It's time for another exciting episode of Just Jeff. 11 days to go. What are you thinking?
I'm thinking that it's much too tight. It's much tighter than I expected. However, I'm hopeful for 2 unlikely sources, and that is Republicans who are turned off by Trump and are really motivated to vote for against him, make sure that Harris wins. I think that's a small percentage, but hopefully enough. And the other is what's been happening lately is most members of the active military generally vote Republican, but Trump has been so nasty and uncivil to the military leaders that I'm hoping he'll drive enough of the military to vote for Harris rather than Trumpy. So I know I'm going out on the deep end here, but those are possibilities, and I'm looking. I'm not happy about this, but I'm not ready to give up the ship. All right, I think she still has a chance of winning.
Well, let me ask you this question, my Hebrew brother from another mother. What do you make of all the Hitler stuff?
What do I make of it? I mean, everyone knows that's the third rail in politics. No one ever says anything running for office. No one ever says anything positive about Hitler. What I'd like to know is, he said Hitler did some good things. I wonder why no one has asked him, could you name what were some of those good things? I'd like to hear about them. So I don't think, first of all, I don't know what he's talking about. I'm sure he doesn't. I don't think he could answer that question. I don't know what is in his mind, and it's just nuts. Okay, and however, I know some Jewish people who are planning to vote for him, and I would think what he said in Charlottesville, when they're walking around saying Nazis should not replace us, and he said there are good people on both sides. I'd like to know what he's talking about. What kind of good people were Nazis or neo-Nazis? I only thought the good ones were the dead ones, or the ones who converted and gave up that ideology. So he's put his foot in his mouth many times, and I don't know. I mean, there's just people, they want to vote for him. They don't have to. There's no rational reason. it's emotional or it's taxes or it's whatever they say. It's really nonsense.
I tend to agree with you on that. And we'll end on that. Jeff, we'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take
Bye,
care.
Dad.
This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.